Good evening, everybody. What is up? Welcome into the Liberty Lounge. My name is Jeremy Todd, and I'll be your host for the evening. I'm super excited to bring on a friend of mine in the Twitterverse, the chair of Duval County LP. You probably know him as Liberty Dad. He is a husband, dad, considers himself an observationalist, a cyclist, home improvement, DIYer, libertarian, and he spends most of his day chasing his 2.5-year-old around the house. And when he's not doing that, he's writing code to automate tasks, which for any salesperson is extremely important. A terrible student, but he considers himself an avid learner. He finds success by just going headfirst into what he does. After spending almost a decade in process optimization and management, where he regularly interacts with engineers, salespeople, leadership, he left his job to stay at home and spend more time with his family, and studied web development and went on to write code professionally. Like I said, DL is currently the chair of the Libertarian Party of Duval. If you don't know, that is Jacksonville, Florida. The largest city in Florida, and he draws upon his observation and experience to lead. He is all speaker as a certified Toastmaster. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in DL Cummings. How are you, brother?
Good. How are you, sir?
Doing so well. So I am from. So you, like me, are from the land of the perpetually hot, and so I find that most of my Twitter arguments are about who has the better weather, Arizona or Florida. Settle that issue right now.
Florida. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and move on to more interesting topics.
Absolutely. All right, you ready to talk some shop? Let's talk
No,
some shop.
I think it really depends on whether or not you are more of a fan of dry weather, because I believe you have a drier climate, or the more humid. I don't have a whole lot of experience with the drier climate, but
Is
for
anyone
me,
a fan of humid?
warm is warm, right? Like as
Yeah.
long as it's like blistering hot, I'm okay. When it starts getting under like, I don't know, 60, I start
Yeah.
whining like a little school child.
Yeah. January here is 70s,
Hmm.
but it is dry. So it
Okay.
is a little colder. And so we get to flex on the number. We're like, oh, we hit 120 this summer. But honestly, like I growing up in Alabama, which is very similar it to Florida, except with more bugs, I guess.
Hmm.
The reality is give me 120 in Arizona over 95 at 90 in Alabama.
Right.
All right. Well, now that the pleasantries are out of the way, let's talk some shop.
Yes.
So, on that note, I thought a few weeks back about because this discussion comes up a lot. It's better to live in a red state. It's better to live in a blue state. And I think as you actually look at some of the states that have the most freedom,
Hmm.
they're pretty purple.
Right.
I think Florida's pretty purple. Texas is at risk of going blue every like within the last two elections. The
Hmm.
presence of people in Austin is in Dallas has always been kind of a blue area, and then Arizona as well, being a pretty purple state. What? Because growing up in Alabama, it's about as red as it gets. I
Right.
didn't really feel like we embraced freedom. So, what are your thoughts on this idea that the right loves freedom and the left hates freedom, coming from somebody who is surrounded by both?
So I'm technically not surrounded by both, because the way that Florida works, we have a highway called I-4, and it kind of goes almost right in the middle of the state, right across. So if you can imagine coming down I-95, and then you have this corridor that kind of goes right diagonally across,
Mm-hmm.
from the East Coast to the West Coast of Florida, and that seems to be the dividing line. So on top, you have more red, and below, you have more blue. So my experience has been primarily with the more red. Now, Duval just recently, I think, if I remember correctly, for the first time in like decades, went blue in the national election, in the last presidential election. And I've only been here about 8 years, so I'm not terribly familiar with the dynamics of red versus blue here. So it's kind of weird. So I think other states, and I don't know, because I came from South Carolina, and then before that from Indiana, and so those are relatively red states, just
Red,
kind of
yeah.
period, right? So I don't really have a lot of experience with this mix. So for me, my experience is like quite literally this half and then this half. Is that the same where you are, or is it more intermixed amongst everybody?
So here in Phoenix, it's very intermingled. Now, I would say that. So I learned something pretty interesting. So Maricopa County, where Phoenix is the second largest voting district in the United States of America, behind LA County. So
Okay.
some of the bigger cities are a little more spliced up, but Maricopa County falls as its own with a little over 5 million in population, and that
Okay.
is pretty purple. I'm not gonna lie. We have we're a red state with a very blue governor, or I'm sorry, a red governor with a very blue mayor over Phoenix.
Mhm.
There's this intermingle of red and blue mayors on all the suburban cities around it, so it is pretty mesh. But The outskirts, I call it Kakesh land,
Mhm.
the desert,
Right.
where you can get lots of acreage. That is red as can be.
Okay.
Those are blue collar people who embrace their guns. They take over missile silos and like live off the grid. Those are some wild folks. Tucson down south, very, very blue, very
Okay.
blue. It's a little closer to the border. But I find that sort of stalemate, at least within
Mhm.
voting borders, is what creates a little bit more freedom than
Right.
one group being able to run away with it. So
Right.
I don't know. That was just a thought. Now I the first person I've talked to from Florida on the show, so wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix down here. So, or over here, I guess maybe a little bit more accurate. But um, I don't have a lot of experience with below the I-4, so I don't know
Yeah.
what it's like necessarily.
Cool, cool. So being in Duval, I assume so you have a much bigger market for Red America. It would be one way to say it.
Mhm.
What are you guys using and how are you marketing to that group? What are some of the hot button things that you focus on as to reach in the party of freedom in relatively red area?
We're just getting started, and I say that because Duval had a when I first started in 2017, we actually disaffiliated because our chair stepped down and then nobody replaced him. And then
Oh,
I got with some other people and I said, "Hey, let's get this thing back up and running because I joined for a reason, not to have nothing." And so we got it back up and going. And then we were slow going for a while. And eventually it got to the point where I think we started to find a groove. And then I became the chair and I there was a nice foundation by that time to build off of. And so then I
mhm.
kind of said, you know what, let's have this 2-year plan. And what's interesting about the 2-year plan is we actually only elect our officers for 1 year at a time.
Oh,
But what I felt was it's appropriate for a leader to give them a long-term vision and
yes.
then very identifiable some metrics from which to judge me by. And then after a year, if everybody likes the plan and it appears that we are on path to get to that plan to meet those goals, then I would be reelected again.
Yeah.
So, um, so part of it, there was a whole bunch of things that I had kind of set out to do, and most of it was really just to do primarily two things: build our local party, just
Mhm.
reach out to the voters, that the people that are already libertarian, they're registered
Yeah.
libertarian. And we have about 2,700 of them,
Okay.
registered libertarians in Duval County. And right now we're running about 15 on average people that come to our meetings. Now we haven't started reaching out to them yet, but that is one of the goals. And
Okay.
then the other thing was to have a candidate, at least one candidate run. And I got really fortunate because 3 people showed up and they're rock solid libertarians. After we sat down and had a conversation, I was like, man, these are like, not only did just 3 people show up, but 3 good people showed up. So that was,
Right.
so like, I don't know how you measure that, but that's a heck of a success that I was not expecting. And
Absolutely.
and so now what we're trying to do is what we are first trying to do is build a presence. And
Mhm.
so we go out and we do, like, once a month we go out to the park and we'll just do a cleanup.
Okay.
We'll get a bunch of pictures taken. We'll put it on there. We'll start posting it. And we've noticed that there's been an increase in social media interaction from other people. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I wanted to, I would have went if I had known about it." Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But the fact is, they're starting to engage. They're starting to take
Right.
notice, right? And that's one of the things that we wanted to create was this real, not just a perspective, but this real um, visual of, hey, the party is doing something. And
Mhm.
so one of those was to get out and start cleaning up. Another one was to get out to events, because the more events that we can get to, the more eyeballs that are on us, the more ears that hear us, And so what we end up doing is just basically touching people. So it's kind of like
Right.
commercials without
Yeah.
the budget of commercials, right? We're out there doing footwork instead. And so that's kind of
Right.
what we're doing right now, is just getting out, and we're trying to, we're trying to let people know that, hey, there's a party here and we're doing stuff. I have been told that years ago, our party was more of a debate club. And
Yeah.
I don't know how people
Years
felt
ago.
about it at the time. Right. But like, this is like maybe 5, maybe even closer to 10 years ago. So way before I
Okay.
even came to Duval, I think. And I don't know how people felt about it, but I know how people tend to feel about it now, is that
Mhm.
they would prefer a more active affiliate. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make a more active affiliate so that we can get more people involved. Because the unfortunate reality is it's very hard to sell an idea, in the realm of liberty, in the realm of politics, when there's only one or two of you, because
Yes.
people really do look at the numbers. They look at it and they're like,
Mhm.
I mean, every libertarian knows this. They look at it and they say, yeah, you're a third party. I mean, you might steal some votes from the Republicans, or you might steal them from the Democrats, but your ideas aren't really going to go anywhere. Right.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. And I'm going to do something dangerous here. Not terribly dangerous, but a little bit. A long time ago, I read The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Trumper, but I think there's, you can find golden nuggets anywhere. And in that
Absolutely.
book, he pointed out, he said, I think he was telling somebody that when you don't have success to rely on, when you don't have a lot to say, to point to, you
Mhm.
create the perception of success. Like, I'm going to be successful. And
Right.
so that's kind of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to say, like, look, yeah, we can be successful, and we will be successful, and not a conditional sense, right? Not like we will be
Mhm.
successful once everybody joins our party. We will be successful in the near future. Successful in what? Well, we're going to go and clean the parks. We're going to go and
Yeah.
do this. We're going to go and do that. We're running 3 city council candidates, right? So we are
Mhm.
just constantly getting out there and doing stuff. And it's a very tricky balance, because you only have so many people and you don't want to burn them
Right.
out, but you also
Yep.
want to be active and you want to give people a reason to be involved. So that's our
Yes.
first goal right now, is to reach out more to the libertarians, but we're not forgetting that there are other people who are disaffected. And the
Sure.
moment we get a chance, we my goal is to say, what is it that you're looking for? And then from there, we can say, here's how the ideas of liberty as we see it will meet your needs. So that's what we
Right.
got going on. It's a bit of a long way around it, but hopefully that answered your
It,
question.
it really it was, but phenomenal. Helps me kind of understand the perspective on where you're at in Duval, because these local affiliates are all at different places,
Mm-hmm.
and but you really showed your sales prowess there with simplifying the sales process. Okay, it is as simple as ask questions. What do
Right.
you value? What is important to you?
Mm-hmm.
And then matching those issues that they care about, those problems that they have, with a solution. And that
Right.
solution is liberty, and showing them how it can be done. So that's phenomenal. Um, so you you mentioned about like defining success, and success may be at this point, we're going to clean a park. It reminded me of something I've been studying a lot from a leadership perspective
Mm-hmm.
on, and you mentioned burnout. It's called expectancy theory from Victor Vroom, and
Okay.
there's basically 3 elements that come into human motivation. He applies it to the workplace, but I think it really works anywhere. Number 1 is, can I do the task that is being asked of me? Like, do I have
Mm-hmm.
arms? Do I have legs? Do I have the tools necessary to accomplish what what I target set out to do? Number 2 is, if I accomplish it, will it set out, if I do this task, will it achieve the result that I want, the goal? So if I make these phone calls, will I make a certain number of sales? And
Mm-hmm.
then the third element is that hitting that target has to be worth it in your value system, right? So do I get enough value out of hitting my goal in order for me to justify it? So
Right.
can I do it? Does it work? And then,
Right.
is it valuable? Are the 3 things. And that's something I talked with Spike about, is like, we have to redefine what winning is.
Right.
And winning for us at certain points in order so people don't get burnt out is like, look, our winning for us is 5%, whatever it may be on a national level, but
Right.
and whatever it may be locally, then you can maintain motivation. Because I don't know about you, but I see a lot of work be put in every 4 years to get people fired up. And DL, and I mean this with all the love in the world, like, where are these people who actually think we're going to win? Like, no, we're not there. The system is not set up. There are a lot of things in our way. We're not going to win. So we have to measure our accomplishments. And maybe it's that we don't get enough value out of hitting these smaller marks for people to go, yeah, it was worth it. But I think if we can restructure and find that, it can really get rid of that sort of dip and lull and
Right.
like heartbreak and frustration. And that's when I see a lot of people give up, and they either go, screw this, it doesn't work, I'm going to go to one of the big two parties, or they go, it's going to not be political anymore.
Right.
So that was a thought.
So think of it this way.
You want to add? Yeah.
Yeah. Think of it this way. You've probably seen any number of military movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you prior service, by the way?
No.
Okay, so I am, and so I do kind of understand some of the mentality that occurs. I've never been in an actual like battle. I've been in war zones, but they were pretty calm and peaceful. But I do understand from a military perspective the thinking that a lot of soldiers have when they go over into a foreign country and they're into battle. So one of the things that all service members really it's a very high value for them is that they don't want to mess up and cause their buddy to die. Right? I don't want to make a mistake that cost my buddy his life. That's a big thing. But I also want to win the war, clearly. I wouldn't, if I'm going over there and we're going to set aside any libertarian views on whether or not we should even be at war, just think of it like we're there, we're trying to fight. I'm there to win the war. But, and I want to win, and I'm aiming to win. I'm working hard. But I also recognize that if we lose, if none of my buddies die, if I don't cause any of their deaths, that in itself is its own win. And I think we need to think along that line, like, hey, yes, I want to win the national election. But as long as this other thing happens, I can at least feel good in some sense, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a parallel. It's not exactly a one-to-one, obviously, because if you lose a war, there's implications and whatnot. But the idea is just to kind of separate that thinking and say, all right, there's this major goal that I want to win. Bring my hand down here. There's this major goal that I want, that I'm seeking to win. But then there's this other one that's directly in front of me. And I think that's what we need as a community to start really thinking about, like, hey, we've got 3 candidates that are running for city council. I want every single one of them to win.
Absolutely.
Right. But I also have some smaller goals that are going to make me feel good, even if we don't win. And I think what we need to do is figure out, what are those smaller goals? If we don't win, what are the goals that are going to make us feel good about the work that we did? And I don't think we identify those. And I think we need to start identifying those so that people feel, because what happens is people get fired up every 4 years. And you see it. You see this arc, and people are fired up, and then it kind of slowly goes down. And there was an image of the donations from the national party that was going around, and people were using it in an inappropriate way. But it was really telling, because basically, if you go back and you look, you see like every 4 years, you see this like spike, and then it kind of goes down. And I think that's how people's motivation also ends up being, like, they get really motivated, and then it just, I don't want to say it dies off, but it just kind of like fizzles away, just kind of slowly goes down. And I think what would be better is if we had it go up and come down. It's naturally going to come down a little bit, but maybe plateau a little bit, because people are invigorated, because they say, hey, these smaller goals, we nailed. We nailed them, whatever those are. And they may be different from state to state, even affiliate, local affiliate to local affiliate.
Absolutely. So defining your goals is going to be extremely important in that. So let me ask you this question, because this comes up a lot, and I think I know how you're going to answer this. At least I hope. What is, if we had to put a mission for the Libertarian Party right now, today, Is that mission to win elections, to spark social change, or and like wake up the masses, or to just grow the party?
So let's see. My options that you gave me were
Or
grow.
any other options? What is the mission,
What
right?
is the mission
Because
of the Libertarian Party?
yeah, is
So
it to win elections or is it to wake up the masses, basically?
So I sharply disagree with a lot of my libertarian peers. I say that the Libertarian Party, its mission is to win elections and influence legislation.
Okay.
That's its mission. But that doesn't mean that the mission of subgroups or people has to be that necessarily same thing.
Mhm.
Right. So when you talk about, like, say, the local level at an affiliate level, our mission, our primary mission, is not necessarily to win elections, although it is. Right now, we have 3
Mhm.
candidates that are running, so that is definitely on our high up on our priority list, right? But I think part of our mission, and I believe that the ground, not the ground, but the closer you are to people, that's where you start getting into things like educating, firing people up, so on and so forth. Now, if you happen to have that Ron Paul moment,
Yeah.
I wasn't part of the Ron Paul moment, but just by observing a lot of peers, it's very clear that there was this moment, even if it was like a,
Mhm.
not like a single moment, like a second, but there was
Right.
this time when a figure really just sparked the fire in people.
Yeah.
And to me, that's great, but we can't rely on that, because what
Correct.
you're doing is
Yeah.
you're putting it's basically putting all your eggs in a single basket. You're
Yeah.
waiting for that one candidate to spark the revolution. Now, I think that when you get that candidate, if you so happen to get somebody that just fires people up, if people on the affiliate level and the state level have been doing what they should be doing, in my opinion, then what happens is everybody's ready to capitalize on that. Right.
Yes.
And that's where that needs to happen, because the Ron Paul, when what I hear, you mentioned this because I sent it to you, that I'm an observationalist. So here's what I've
Mhm.
observed. People, when they talk about Ron Paul, they talk about mostly when Ron Paul ran for president.
President. Right.
I don't hear a lot of people talking about, like, oh man, what really got me going was hearing Ron Paul on his podcast.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not to say it wasn't effective. It's not to diminish it. But anyway, what I'm getting at is there seems to be a very specific time frame under which most people identify Ron Paul is really getting them fired up. And it was when he
Yeah.
was running for presidency, for
Yeah.
the presidency. And so this is why I believe that we cannot rely on those kind of leaders per se, because it's a very narrow window and it only happens once every 4 years if we happen to have the
If we
right
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
We haven't had a Ron Paul since. Nobody has ever since said, oh, this presidential candidate fired me up to libertarianism.
Yeah.
Nobody has said that. And he ran, I don't remember because I wasn't really involved per se, but he ran what, in the 90s,
It's
80s, something like
08
that.
and 12.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
right. Why am I? Oh,
but
good
he
Lord.
also he ran as a Republican in 08 and 12, and he had the Giuliani moment, and then again
Right.
in 2012 he kind of lived off of that
Right.
run, but they just completely shut him down. But a lot of people don't know he was a Libertarian Party candidate in the late 80s, early 90s, right?
Right.
First.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I got my dates all jacked up. Sorry,
yeah,
everybody.
it's all
Don't be
good.
mad at me. Back in
Dad
those
brain,
days,
baby.
I was a conservative and I was barely paying attention, so I apologize. But so I think the answer to your question is, what is the mission? The mission of the party should be to influence elections and to influence legislation and win elections. And then you get the state level. I think the state level is where you really get the support for local affiliates, and literally you are helping build momentum in the state. And then I feel like at the local level, that's where it's our job to reach out to individuals, to help provide training, all the different things. And if you were to look at my 2-year plan, it included some of that. I said, look, we need to grow as members. Maybe you just want to be a member that gets better at delivering the message. I want to help grow that. Maybe you have aspirations to go on and work at the state level or the national level. I want to help grow that. I want to help prepare you for that. So we, like, for instance, I'll give you a great example. Please jump in anytime because I'm a chatty one.
Okay, no,
But
please.
one of the things that I try to do is to hold a meeting in a formal manner according to Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay.
When you're a smaller body, when you've got like 10 people, you have a lot of flexibility to not do that because people aren't as ornery necessarily. There's not as much combative nature. It's just easier, so you naturally can get away with not necessarily following all the steps, but I try to follow them in as much as I can, because I know that some, hopefully some people will want to move on to the state level and do things. They'll want to go on to the national level, and it becomes much more critical that they understand the proper procedures and they understand the process. And if they go in there ignorant, then I look at it and I say, as a leader, I have failed them.
I failed them. Yeah.
I didn't prepare them so that they could go on and do their best at the state and the national level or wherever they go. Right. So to me, a lot of this training happens primarily at the local level. That doesn't mean that I say that national or state shouldn't be involved. I think they should be. Right. But that's not the primary for me, in my opinion.
Right. I think there's two things. I'll start with the winning elections. You can't put the cart in front of the horse, right?
Right.
I'm from Alabama, so I get to bring up Nick Saban as
Mhm.
want to, 'cause it's my show, right?
Right.
But he talks about you don't focus on winning. You focus on everything it takes in order to win. And
Right.
so for me, I think if you want to win, you got to focus on waking up the masses. It's like A leads to B.
Right.
What really bothers me is the political conversation, like the conversation where like we feel like we can politically strategize our way into it without
Mhm.
being persuasive. And
Right.
like you said, I think that can be done organizing on the local level, but at a bigger picture, it's just not going to work. We're not going to be
Right.
able to strategically that just doesn't work. So we have to focus on having conversations with dinner table conversations with one
Mhm.
another, with our friends, interacting on social media. Each one, can we double, and that sort of thing. Then those people become as on fire, I guess, as we are, and they
Right.
become voters essentially
Right.
that turn
Right.
around to each one teach one, and it's sort of a chicken and egg. So that always drove me crazy, but not what I want to talk about. You hit something that I don't know if you know. I'm running for LNC after
Right.
seeing all the nonsense.
At large, right?
And yes, yeah, because
Mhm.
we are moving. Next June, my family will be relocating to Kentucky, so we can be closer to my wife's family and my family
Okay.
with the little dude. And so it's not in the cards to run for region, which would be more appropriate, but I can't. So we're going at large. And
Okay.
the second point in my platform is to make the national party begin to focus on developing their people, because
Mhm.
in order to wake people up, you have to grow your people. As you look around the party right now, there
Mhm.
are some incredible people, but there are
Right.
also people who don't know where they're sleeping tonight. There are people who can't hold down a job. There are people who don't have the skills to function as a successful human. We're kind of the awkward kids in the room when it comes down to it. And so
Right.
that's part of the goal of this show, because I was an awkward kid. I was an emo kid before sales, and
Right.
I had like an eyebrow ring at one point, and then
Right.
at 20, I was thrust into running my first business, having a profit, having to meet other people and their payroll. Those sort of pressures really force you into growing yourself, and that's where I developed this obsession with reading the works of Dale Carnegie and Jim Rohn and Brian Tracy and
Mhm.
all of those. And it got me hooked on that culture. And I'm saying, man, if we would focus on growing our people will party. And so that was very, very exciting to hear. It's the second plank in my platform. Man, we
Right.
don't need to bring in political strategists who are going to tell us, oh, well, what you need to do to appeal to the left is stop talking about this libertarian principle, or what you need to do to appeal to the right is stop talking about this libertarian principle. That's nonsense. What
Right.
works is when people see you, they're impressed by you, and they want to be like you. So they
Right.
come and they go, "Oh, I'll give you a great." So I just started working again, and one of my coworkers, she's a little younger. Her boyfriend's in the military, but we were talking about Joe Rogan the other day,
Mhm.
and so you know exactly what I talked about. I go, "Hey, did you see the Dave Smith episode?" Right,
Right.
and it sparked this conversation. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, you know," and she's been like, has a certain level of respect for me because I'm one of her leaders, but
Right.
we've also had great topics of conversation that didn't involve this, and so
Right.
that was my window. But if I'm somebody who like she hates at work because I'm not intelligent, I'm not a good
Right.
leader, I that falls on deaf ears. It
Right.
starts with improving who we are, and
Right.
then the party like e- becoming the best version of yourself will help this party become the best version of itself.
Right.
So, anyways, I'm very very excited to hear that. Any thoughts on that? I want to. We're
So
going to we're swapping tangents, man. We're
no, it's good.
boxing
It's
it up.
good. So rolling back a little bit, you had mentioned that, about political strategists and, trying to play the game like the left and the right do. And I think the biggest problem with that is that we are not, if you think about it, we are not up at the level of them. And I don't necessarily mean like the quality of our ideas or our integrity or anything like that. I just mean that in the context of, we do not have the attention of the masses. We do not have the perception of what we're going to deliver of the masses that they do. Clearly, a lot of people believe that the Republicans are going to deliver a certain thing. A lot of
Mhm.
people believe that the Democrats are going to deliver a certain thing. And we know this because when we talk to people, they say, oh, like every libertarian has heard this, right? Well, I would vote libertarian, but you guys are just not going to win. Right.
Mhm.
And so people are turning us down, not on the basis of our ideas. And maybe that's the real issue, right? I tend to believe that most people, when they talk to us, they talk at the surface level, and you have to dig down a little bit to find out what
Yeah.
it is that they're really saying. But
Yeah.
but even assuming that they're not, their dismissal is not on the basis of the ideas. Not typically. I mean, there are some people, have their perceptions, or what they believe, our ideas mean, or how they will end up playing out. But a lot of the times it's really just a matter of, oh, you guys are too small to have an impact. And
Mhm.
so
Okay.
I think in that particular context, we have to do things a little differently. And this is the whole underdog, right? The underdog has an
Yeah.
uphill battle. They have to fight things a little bit differently. They have to come out of nowhere. They have to surprise people. We're not surprising people. And I don't necessarily mean with
Right.
wins. We need to really deliver some surprises to people when we're having a conversation, and they need to,
Oh.
they need to
Okay.
be
Okay.
surprised at what they think they know about us. And are we
Okay.
doing that? Are we surprising people? I don't think we are, and I'll give you, I don't mean this to sound boastful, but again, I operate on the basis of observation. So what I do is I
Mhm.
observe things that I see happening around me, and then I draw conclusions based on that, and maybe things that I've read or things that I've heard from other people. And so every Friday night we have friends come over, and it varies on which ones, but we have one particular friend that comes over all the time. And I did a podcast episode on, discussion with the progressive. I guess, in further conversation, we've determined that maybe progressive isn't quite the right word. And that's
Mhm.
just because I think maybe the progressive is kind of going a little bit further left than he is. So maybe he's now
Mhm.
considered a moderate. Maybe like
Right.
10 years ago, he was more of a progressive. I don't,
Yeah.
but I, when I have a conversation, he's a smart guy. He's not a dumb guy, right, at all, you know. And when I have a conversation with him, sometimes I'll see something like this. He'll be like, "All right," and you can see that
Yeah.
I've spurred some thought, right?
Mhm.
Didn't convince him. He wasn't like, "Oh, wow, you're totally right," and "Wow, that's such a brilliant idea," and now I'm ready to be a libertarian. Like, not even close. But what he does is you can see it written on his face that something has caught him by surprise. He was
Right.
like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting this." And I think we
Mhm.
need to start looking to deliver surprises to people when we have a conversation with them,
Interesting.
right? They need to be, because when people are surprised, then they're like, that's interesting. I'm going to have to give that one some thought. But
Yeah.
if they're not surprised, if they're like, man, this is the same stale argument that I've heard every single time,
Yeah.
then they're already prepared to dismiss it.
Yeah.
So we need to really work. And this is why I give such, libertarians such a hard time, because I'll see, libertarians post online. They're like, oh man, look at all these books. They'll show like 7
Yeah.
books and they're all libertarian books. And I'm like, where's your communication books? Where are your books on social interaction? Where are your books on anything else that
Sales,
has to do with
leadership, right?
sales, leadership, organization, something, right? How to win friends and influence enemies, or I always get it jacked up. This is what
People.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what happens when you do something funny,
Yeah.
try to be funny, and you come up with a new way of saying it, and you do it long enough, and then you can't undo it.
You forget. Yeah.
So yeah, now I can't even say the book's name correctly. But this is the kind of, like there are tons of, like, if somebody were to say like, what book should I read? I'm like, man, I tell you what, I got lots of books that you can read that I
Mhm.
think would go a long way, because at the end of the day, all we're really doing is trying to convince somebody else to see our point of view. That's what we're trying to
Yeah.
do. And the rest of the world, they're not philosophers. They're,
Right.
you're not going to deliver this logically sound idea, and they're going to be like, wow, that's really good. And you didn't use a single logical fallacy whatsoever. I mean, I'm going to have to, like, nobody thinks that way, right?
Exactly.
We have to learn how to deliver an idea that hits their emotions,
Yes.
and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that is a matter of knowing your audience.
Yeah.
So, that to me, that's where we are. We are the underdog. We cannot compete. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we don't entirely toss it all out. Maybe the
Right.
national level, maybe they do play some of those games, because to a degree, there is a game and there are rules to it. And you do got to play to those rules to some degree. But I
Yeah.
think our failure is relying on them too much. Right.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
rely on the political games too much. We rely on um, uh, logic too much. What we need to do is we need to come out. We need to surprise people. And if we're not surprising people, then we need to reevaluate. What are we doing? Why are people not surprised when I talk to them?
Right. Then yeah, that I love that idea of surprises. I'm like a great salesperson. I'm going to steal it. I hope that's okay, and run with it, because that's phenomenal. So recently in the liberty movement, they would say, yeah, all that stuff is great, but take a look around you. The world is burning down
Mhm.
as we go through it, and there's conversation about time preference and this creation of this group that they either are or aren't going by the term post-libertarians. But basically, they're saying politics at this point in time is useless. You got to focus on something else. And they go, the short game is your only option right now. And that made me think of, speaking of reading other books,
Mhm.
it's Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I thought it was really
Right.
funny as we were discussing this show. I was like, hey, have you heard of this? And you're like, I'm not sure. And then you go look on your bookshelf and there it is. This is
Right.
one of those that's like right there with Carnegie and How to Win Friends and Influence
Right.
People. Everybody owns this book, right? There's a chapter in there where we talk about urgent versus important,
Mhm.
and how leaders make decisions about that. And I can actually bring it up. And I just want your thoughts on that. Like, are we too far gone for politics to make a difference in people's lives? How would a leader look at this? And kind of what's your thoughts on, while I bring this on
Sure.
the
So
show?
let me backtrack a little bit. A while
Yeah.
last year, we hosted our state convention, and we hosted a debate with all the presidential candidates. And I did a podcast on the presidential candidates afterward, but I
Right.
wanted to be a little different about it. So what I said was, like, instead of saying who I like and all the rest are poo poo or whatever, I said, I'm going to assign a single word to every single candidate. And then I'm going to describe why that word fits them. And so I went through and, of course, I did nail down which one that I thought was the one out of the group that should be the presidential nominee. But then what I did was I said, here is a word for this one. Here's a word for this one. Here's a word for this one. And this is where they belong in the liberty movement. And one of the things that I find frustrating is that people tend to, in the liberty movement, we tend to have this idea like, your idea sucks. My idea is the one that we should do. And I look at it and I say, actually, maybe you do your idea and I do my idea, and you are effective with one crowd and I'm effective with another crowd. Right. And to
I get an
me,
amen. Hallelujah.
right, there is no one way to do this. And you can look at it in any different number of ways from our society. So religion, take that for an example.
Right.
Some people are Baptists, some people are Mormons, some people are Lutheran, some people are Catholic, they're Pentecostals. They're all effectively under this umbrella of religion, even if they don't believe it's the same umbrella, right? I understand that they all have varying beliefs, but they all believe in this spiritual idea, and they're all going about it differently. But at the end of the day, you could collect all of them up and say, here's this group of religious people. And then you have a group of non-religious people, and they have their differings, right? You have some people that might say, hey, I'm a total atheist. You might have some that say, well, I'm a deist. You have some that say I'm agnostic, right? And so they kind of fall into this maybe, and bear with me as I'm not trying to categorize people as in a very binary sense, like religious or non-religious per se, but I'm just saying, like, you can kind of group people, and even in that group, you have these differences. And I've met salespeople, some salespeople, there are some foundational things, right? But then there are some differences between salespeople. They have a different approach. And I think these different approaches, this is why, and the approaches are very unique to the individual. So this is why I don't believe that we can necessarily look at it and say, well, your idea, this post-libertarian idea, or this current libertarian, this current or the pre-libertarian, or I don't really know how you categorize all this, but I don't think that there's a one size fits all. I know that the Free Staters, they're really big, and they're like, look, our ideas are working. They're making some successes, right? Do I think that's the only way to do it? No, not the only way. But I think that it takes a certain mindset. I think that the people that are involved, that are making those gains, are in a particular mindset, right? And that mindset helps them toward those gains. There are people that are willing to play the political game, and I think we need them. We need them to go out there and play the game, because while they're playing the political game, you might have some activists that are playing the activist game, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever that looks like. Maybe they're out protesting. Maybe they're out, I don't know if it's appropriate to call the Free Staters activists, but we'll go with it for the time being. Maybe they're doing this Free State project where they're like, hey, let's bring as many people as we can, so that we have a large collective body to operate off of, right? And so while everybody's doing their own thing, we're having a little bit of impact here, a little impact here, a little bit impact here, a little impact here, and to make it into the sales, imagine if you're a national company. Well, or maybe an international company, the way that you market your product in the United States is not going to be the same way that you market it in, say, Brazil or Germany or Indonesia, right? You're going to be a little bit different because there are different customs, there are different things that appeal to people in these different countries. But it even kind of works that way in the United States. Your language, the things, the imagery that you use may vary a little bit in Florida than they will New York City or California or Montana, right? I mean, there might be some similarities, but there's going to be some differences too. And you can't just use the same exact approach everywhere and think that you're going to win. It just won't work. So now you can bring that image back up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that was phenomenal. It actually answers my second question, which was how do we go post-libertarian infighting, as you brought up. But I think it's just the realization that it's a 10-lane highway. We're all going in the same direction to the same. Some of us may get off an exit earlier, but we're all basically going to the same place. So why do we have to look over at at other people's lanes and go, what you're doing is a waste of time. My lane is the way to go. It has never made sense to me. And I think one of the things they're using to justify that is that this whole idea of time preference. They're not so they view playing politics as the long game,
Right.
and they believe we might not make it to 2024, and we're definitely not going to make it to 2028. Call
Right.
it black pilled, call it whatever you want to.
Right.
They go the 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 deadline is in front of us, right?
Right.
And that reminded me of being a business owner, being a leader, and this Stephen Covey thing, and that things can be urgent and not urgent, and important and not important. And
Right.
so important is it's high in value, not
Mhm.
important is it's low in value.
Mhm.
Urgent is about deadlines. It's got to happen right now. Not urgent is it can be put off. And one of the things that I think one of the mistakes that we make, especially early on in leadership, is that we tend to get consumed by the urgent.
Mhm.
Essentially, right here, this quad one, urgent and important. These are things like crises,
Mhm.
the deadline driven. And what this leads to, though, is stress, burnout, which ultimately it's sort of a self-perpetuating problem, because when you focus on these things, they don't change. You
Right.
don't implement the systems and the processes. You're not fixing the algorithm. And
Right.
then you end up stressed, burnout, and then whoop, back into the loop, right? And
Right.
that's where people go to die. I feel like this is maybe where the post-libertarians are. They see the world as it is and they go, man, we have to address this immediately. Well, that's great, but then what do you do next? Then what do you
Right.
do next? Then what do you, if you're successful, what do you do next? What do you do next? Someone as a leader has to step in and go, we have to talk about the long game. And that are the
Right.
things that are important,
Right.
but not urgent. And
Right.
politics, like you said, does nothing but give us a unique platform in which to reach more people. Because as brilliant as I think a lot of the agorist ideas are, the Bitcoins, the homesteading, the all of these things I think are brilliant. Ultimate end of the road for us as we reach it. DL, they don't work when the tanks roll in if you don't have people standing shoulder to shoulder with you, in my opinion. You
Right.
can't get 10 of your buddies and just say, like, look at Waco. They did everything agorist. Let's focus on our religion and put our
Mhm.
families first. Let's, let's weaponize ourselves, put up a lot of guns, and the government still burn children alive to the ground with tanks.
Right.
So they're not going to leave you alone, but they will leave a million people alone.
Right.
And if they are standing shoulder to shoulder in unison. And so somebody, in my opinion, has to step in and do the long game and say, this may take longer, but
Mhm.
we're never going to accomplish anything if we don't feed the algorithm correctly. And that's how I
Right.
view voting as well. Do I think voting in the presidential election in 2024 is going to change my world? Absolutely not. But as you established earlier, it's going to give the organization that I'm using to reach people a
Mhm.
lot more credibility. It's going
Right.
to give them a much bigger platform. It's going to give us the ability to say, we're not just number 3. We're like number 3 by this smaller margin. And
Right.
if this or this happens, hey, it's anybody's show at this point.
Right.
And that's all we're doing is feeding the algorithm, in my opinion, when we're playing this politics game. Now, what I will agree on is that things are bad. Things are real
Yes.
bad. And if you are going into libertarian activism and believing that you are going to support a campaign for president, they're going to win and fix your life, you're in a bad spot. You need to take a step back.
Right.
And you do need to focus on yourself. This was a tweet out and it went a little viral, and some folks got mad at me. I said, look, if you don't have $1,000 in the bank, that needs to
Right.
be priority number 1. Don't go starting your podcast. Don't go to a county meeting.
Right.
Don't get involved and set up a table at your school. Go do some DoorDash and put $1,000 in the bank. Because
Right.
ultimately, if you can't buy your own food when you go out with your friends, why would they respect and listen to your ideas?
Right.
It's so extremely important to focus on who we are. And so that I can sort of see that bounce back and forth. You've been a leader before. You're a leader right now. How do you see these two things and how they impact
So the way
the
that
state of it?
So great question. The way that this works is this quadrant. According to the book, the ideal position is to be in quad 2. And that a lot of people operate in quad 1, the very important, the very urgent, so they're basically putting out fires. And this is, and I don't want to necessarily box people in because I haven't really sat down to think exactly where libertarians are, but we can kind of we can operate on what we understand at this current moment. And so assume for a moment that we believe that those who call themselves a post-libertarian are operating in quad one, right?
That's the way I see it.
And right. And then we might say, well, we think we need to be in quad two. Now, I think that quad two is anybody that's watching can look at it and see like there's activities on there. So to me, quad two can be all the varying activities that might be valuable in spreading liberty. So that means maybe running a candidate. That means maybe going out and protesting. That maybe means going door to door knocking, taking your affiliate tent and going to events and talking to people about liberty. So it's all these different things. Maybe it's hosting a book club at your house and bringing just 10 people over, right? One person impacting 10 people at one time, or five, even
Right.
5 people, right? And saying, hey, I'm going to help you grow you in your understanding of libertarianism. Maybe it's, you mentioned earlier that I was involved in Toastmasters. So maybe I sit down and maybe somebody doesn't have time for Toastmasters at the prescribed meetings, but they can come over to my house and maybe just for 10 minutes, we talk about ways to improve their communication on the things that I have learned by attending. Right. So all those things are in quad two. And then quad one is like, hey, city council is getting ready to vote on this crazy thing. We need to get out there. We need to react right away. It's important and it's urgent. We got to do something. At the national level, the president is, basically making edicts and finding ways to implement them. We need to get out there. That's important. That's urgent. So then you start looking, you say, all right, well, then we've got what about this quad 3 and quad 4? Well, in the book, the way that he describes it is that the only way that you can get to quad 2, because a lot of people are operating primarily in quad 1, they're doing they're putting out fires. The only way that they can get to where they're really operating with the important but not urgent things, so they're very important but they're not fires, is to take away from quad 3 and quad 4. Particularly quad 4. So then we start looking, what are the behaviors that we're engaging in as libertarians that might fall into quad 4? Maybe those behaviors are fighting with each other over trivial matters, right? Maybe they're, hey, you know what? I could dial back my social media a little bit. I can dial back this or that. And I think it will vary from person to person because we're all going to be doing different things and we're all going to be doing different things that aren't particularly productive. And so then, and so we start dialing back in the areas where it's reasonable to dial back, quad 3, quad 4, the not important and maybe the urgent stuff, and maybe the not important and not urgent at all. Because let's be honest, is it really important or urgent to respond to that person that doesn't seem to understand capitalism, as a definition as we understand it? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
And is it important to, if it's an urgent thing, but it's not really important, we know that it's not important, maybe, and I'll use myself as an example. I spent a lot of time putting together responses to Cato, but I didn't really spend a lot of time on two different on 2 instances. But what I didn't do is I didn't sit down and say, is this really urgent? Is it really important? So it might have been not important, but maybe urgent because, in the media, it's urgent because something is coming out and it's like, oh, everybody's talking about it, so it's urgent. But the question is it important? Right. Yeah. And so I think this is where libertarians really need to get, rather than fighting each other. And I think fighting each other for the most part is going to be quad 4. And this is why I oppose it so much. And this is why I tend to be a lot more flexible. Like you'll almost never hear me say this person is not a libertarian. I would rather say this idea is not a libertarian idea, or this idea is not, it's missing the mark on what a proper libertarian idea is. And then we can talk about the idea. But I think that fighting a person, saying this person is not libertarian, I think that totally is in quad 4, and we totally need to get rid of it. And this was the basis of my tweet when I said, we need to get to, post-infighting. Post-infighting libertarianism needs to be a thing, right? Yeah. Because what we need to do is we need to say, like, do I really need to fight with this person? Do I need to call this person out on whatever silly thing that they said?
Yes.
Is it that big of a deal?
Yeah.
probably not.
No.
And I'm probably going to spend a whole lot more energy and time fighting them than I will actually convincing them.
That's right.
And I can do other things. Like, let's just say that between you and I, you say something crazy offensive. I could argue and be like, oh, dude, you're a total bigot. And this is a terrible thing that you said. I can't believe you. Or I could just get to know you and try to figure out what is it that made you even think of that idea. Right. And through the process of getting to know you, I've developed a relationship, which means that I have developed a little bit of ability to speak to you at some later point, but we jumped the gun on that, right?
Yeah,
And
we
so
do.
those are the things that I think we need to be doing as a community rather than fighting. Because the first thing that made me the first thing that crossed my mind a moment ago when you were talking about like, hey, if we have to stand shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shoulder, if we're all infighting, the only way that we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder is if all hell absolutely breaks loose. Because
Right.
if the more that you're my enemy, the more it's going to take for me to stand by your shoulder. Right. And until the
Absolutely.
bullets are literally flying by my head, if I hate you enough, I'm not willing to stand by you. And like, look, I know movies aren't real, but there's a certain level of reality that we can see in human behavior in movies. And we see this all the time in movies, right? You got these two factions that hate each other, and then they realize we hate each other, but we're going to have to bury this hatchet for a time being because
Right.
right now the bullets are coming our way. We don't have time to fight each other at this point. And so the question is, do we as a community really want to make it to that point before we're willing to work with each other? I think that's a bad recipe. And I think that we need to figure out what hatchets we can bury now sooner than later so that we can stand
Yeah.
shoulder to shoulder and get as closer to that quad 2 as we can. And that quad 2 encompasses a lot of things. So I had mentioned the podcast that I was talking about that I had done where I labeled everybody. One of
Right.
the things that I labeled Vermin Supreme as a vaudeville guy. And at first I was like, I don't really like this guy, because I wasn't really keen on the things that he was doing. But then I realized, you know what? He is getting some attention. That's important.
Right.
We need to get that attention. And vaudeville has a place in the Liberty community,
Yeah.
right? And so there is a place for vaudeville or for those theatrics in Quad 2, just as much as there's a place for the people that want to put on a suit and tie and play the political game, just as much as those who want to put on a t-shirt and get out and protest with a sign and tell everybody that, hey, war is terrible, it's evil, right? There's a place
Yeah.
in Quad 2 for all three of those and more. That is the big tent, Quad 2.
Yeah. That dude, I promise I haven't had that much. I have nothing
But
to
it's
add.
okay.
It is hard to make me speechless, but you nailed every point. So I'm going to shut up and we're going to take a question. This question is from my very best friend from childhood. Actually married my wife and I. He conducted the ceremony and he has
Okay.
a great question that he has come across. So let me give you some background on this guy because I find that you mentioned the Ron Paul revolution earlier, and that's where like most people found liberty.
Right.
There was another moment, and it was I call it the Trump moment in 2016, where a lot of us were so disgusted with the state of the world that we started looking, and Gary Johnson was kind of like a soft pillow to land on. The thing
Right.
was, by following Gary Johnson, we got in these other circles, and eventually, as some of us have not. But anyways, he was a Johnson supporter back in 2016, and has kind of had issues with the whole liberty movement, and it all stems from this one question. So I'm hoping to get your thoughts on it. He says, "Yeah, how do you solve the purity test problem when you attract people and candidates to the LP?"
Easy question. Believe it or not. For me, in my opinion.
Okay.
You talk about ideas. That's it. I don't worry about whether or not somebody's a libertarian. It's in very rare cases have I said that somebody is not a libertarian. And the reason that I did it is because they didn't identify as a libertarian, at least in the long term. And their ideas didn't reflect it, but mostly because they didn't generally identify. And the last person that I did that with was Donald Trump, because he started broaching this, like, oh, well, I'm pretty
Ask Rand
libertarian.
Paul.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, you have, as far as I know, you have never identified as a libertarian. So why would I defend you as a libertarian when you've never identified with it and you seem to only be doing it now that it's politically expedient, right? But I do that not as a purity test, but as a matter of objective fact, right? Like, hey, when somebody says, why did you say that? I would say, well, because he's never said that. But then you look at somebody like Justin Amash, who has consistently over many, many years identified as a libertarian, identified as a Hayekian libertarian specifically, and he has presented a lot of his ideas in the framework as, in the context of libertarianism, even if he didn't necessarily use all the jargon, right? Now, we can argue and debate over whether this idea that he's espoused is a libertarian idea or fitting for libertarian, but ultimately he is identified as one for a very long time, and he has identified very specific concepts that we hold dear in the libertarian community as ideas that he holds dear, right? So so it would be reasonable to say, like, okay, I'm going to go with it, you're a libertarian, now let's talk about a particular idea, right? And even libertarians that I meet that I'm kind of questioning, I'm like, I don't know if you're
Right.
I just go with it, because I'm like, let's just talk about the idea. Because the reality is, at the end of the day, the reason that purity tests are so problematic is because you are basically fighting somebody over their identity. And as much as people hate the idea of identity politics, we all at least appreciate having an identity, even if it doesn't get to the level of identity politics. I like, if somebody were to say, DL, you are, you're pretty good looking for a gay man, I'm going to be like,
The
I'm not
timing
gay.
on Forest Mommy's chat, though.
Right. I'm going to say, I'm not gay. It's not that I have a problem with gay people. I just happen not to be gay. I enjoy my identity as a straight man, not so much these days because I'm married, but when I was a single man, I enjoyed it because I was out looking for a significant other who would happen to be a woman, right? So therefore that identity was important to me, not because I had a problem with somebody else per se, but because there was a particular thing that I was seeking. So I think we need to get away from this idea of worrying about purity tests, worrying about who's a real libertarian, and just talk about the ideas, because it's a lot less combative. It's so much easier if somebody says, well, I believe in UBI. Well, I think that there are some problems with UBI and how it works in the libertarian ideology. So let's talk about that. Guess what? Now I have totally separated this idea of UBI from who this person believes they are. So now they don't have to defend who they are. They only have to defend this idea, right? And that's what makes identity politics so difficult, because people intertwine their idea, or I'm sorry, their identity with an idea. That's where identity politics is really problematic.
Yeah.
We in the liberty community should avoid that. We should avoid almost forcing people into identity politics, which is what I think happens when we start fighting people about their identity. I feel like we're kind of boxing them in and forcing them to engage in identity politics, because we're basically saying, rather than saying this idea doesn't work, we're saying effectively your identity doesn't work.
Right.
So we're kind of like arguing identity politics while we might dislike it. And I'm like, stop doing it. You want to get away from it? Talk about ideas. You want to stop the purity test? Get away from it. Because here, think about it this way. Let's say you identify as a libertarian and you have like 10 ideas that I think are not libertarian.
Right.
I could say, well, you're not a really libertarian. And all we're going to argue about is whether or not you are a libertarian or not. That's what we're going to argue about. Yes. But there's 10 ideas we're not touching. 10. 10. Right. And so let's just say I take one of those and I say, well, let's talk about this idea. Let's just say it's UBI. And I say, let's talk about UBI. And we work this out. And let's say I convince you of that, man, UBI is really not a great libertarian idea. And then you go, man, and it won't happen overnight, but let's just say over time, you start to agree with me. Guess what? I've just taken 10% of the ideas that I don't like from you, and I've removed them, and I've switched you away. So now you're only, in my, if you will, you're only 90% not libertarian as opposed to 100%, right? But it's much easier to bring somebody away from an idea than it is an identity. So get away from it, and that's what we need to do in the liberty community. We need to focus on ideas. That's it. Because there's lots to talk about there.
Man,
It doesn't matter what the idea is.
There's so much, but I got to stop you on that quote. That's a clip right there about, oh man, I got so excited and I missed it. About I'm gonna go find it. I'm very sorry. My brain
It's all good.
not working great right now. Okay, so a couple things. What I liken it to is my own personal experience, and that is with church and the evangelical church, trying to get people to come into the church, right? And that is that if you tell people, well, you can't come to church because you're not a Christian. Well, how does that work? The goal should be get them in the room, get them here, right? If they have one thing where they go, I might be a libertarian. You know what? You might be. Come on in. Right. Whatever that is, we need to be welcoming them with open arms, because what happens is when you get in the room and you're surrounded by people who believe this, now you've multiplied the influence. And then they may have this belief system that they had in their old life or whatever it is. And then the pastor breaks it down. It doesn't even have to be you who breaks it down. They're listening to the pastor or the podcaster or the candidate, and they go, wow, these people that I identify with believe this. Maybe I should explore it a little bit more. So that, I think, is the perspective on it. And there are all these things that libertarians are never going to see eye to eye on across the abortion debate, the immigration debate, all of these things. And we need to exist in a world where that's okay, because the reality is our mission, it goes back to our mission and our goal. Is our mission and our goal to find the true libertarian, or is our mission and our goal to grow? And if our mission and our goal is to grow, you have to I don't want people to decide whether or not they are libertarian based on their opinion on immigration or their position on abortion. I want people to decide they're libertarian, embrace our philosophy, and then sort of self-discover how these issues affect them. That you don't put the cart in front of the horse. You don't have to be a Christian to come to church. Church is not for Christians. Liberty is not for libertarians. This is so we can reach the masses and show them a way. So that's number one. The other thing, God, this was so good, DL. Man, I'm sorry. I'm a little fired up because you got me fired up. You have these three things that is identity. And I think a lot of this not a real libertarian purity test stuff is we are so small. Every side of this party, the guys who are Mises to the Fakertarians to all of it, we're fighting over a word and what that word means. And because we are small, we are worried we are going to lose the sanctity and grip on that word. We're worried that there is going to be a group of infiltrators who come in and make libertarian mean something not libertarian. And I get that fear. But if we are operating in that fear, we're not bringing people in and letting this is what I liken it to is, do you believe in your product? If you believe in the product, which is liberty, then I'm not worried about people who have currently a different ideology coming in and changing it, because my product is better, plain and simple. And the more they look at it, the more they study it, the more they're exposed to it, the more they're going to realize this product is better and embrace it. So I want everybody in the room. If you marched in Charlottesville, I want you in the room. If you wore a pussy on your face at the women's march and you had your pronouns are she's the alien pronouns or whatever, I want you to be in the libertarian circles, because this product can really change anybody. And
Right.
because it really is the perfect political ideology as I see it. So if I believe in my product, I'm not scared of anybody
Right.
because I know I'm right and I know
Right.
this is right and I know eventually you're going to see the way. And so then when you get them to embrace that philosophy, like you said, then you can separate ideas
Right.
and you can. And but the key in discussing ideas is not discussing, is this a libertarian idea? So I had Spike on for episode 1, and one of his best quotes from was, "They don't give a shit whether it's libertarian or not,"
Right.
and they don't.
Right.
The especially new people, they don't make their value system on whether or not this is libertarian or not.
Right.
So we have to make good, sound arguments that meet them where they are and on their value system on these ideas, and
Absolutely.
show them that our product is better at doing that. And that,
Right.
I think, is a great bow on it because, as you said earlier, those are the things that surprise people
Right.
when we can come and say, you know what, I agree with your outcome that you're looking for. Here's why my system and process
Right.
meets it. You know what I mean? Okay.
Yeah. You're a salesperson, right?
Yes. Every
Okay.
day for the rest of my life.
My first job was selling vacuum sweepers door to door. I hated it, by the
I
way.
got one.
I sold
Yeah, I
Kirby
would like,
vacuum sweepers. I
yeah,
hated
I
it.
have I have a Kirby.
So
There's no, it's a school of hard knocks.
yeah,
But that's why when a kid knocked on the door with mine, I was like, you know what? I appreciate the hustle. You got
right.
it.
Yeah. So here's what I learned from that experience. Observationalist, right? Is
Mhm.
that we would sometimes go around and you heard the stories about some guy that would, kind of dog on the other vacuum sweepers, right? Whatever
Mhm.
they were, Rainbow and some of the other companies. But by and large, the techniques that we were taught, the things that I observed that actually worked, were showing people why my product was good for them. That's it.
Yeah.
Not showing them why somebody else's product was bad for them, why mine was good for them. And
Yes.
I think that's what libertarians really need to focus on is why is my product good for you? Right. Um,
Put him in
instead of saying,
quarantine.
I'm sorry.
I said, put you in quarantine.
Right. No, it's just a quick cough.
We got the
Um,
sensors. Yeah.
right.
One quick cough and
Right.
it's a death
Well,
sentence.
I think that I think it's an easy trap to fall into is to dog on the other person's product, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm doing the more political route. This person's doing the post-libertarian route. This person's doing the activist route, whatever that route might be, and then talking trash. No, just talk and to learn to deliver the message of why your product in the way that you're delivering it is the best for the person that you're talking to.
The
And by
benefit.
doing that,
Yeah.
you will naturally find the people that need to hear that message. The
Yeah.
post-libertarian crowd, they're going to find the people naturally. They're going to find the people that need to hear the message as they
Yeah.
deliver it. The
Absolutely.
political crowd, they're going to find the crowd that needs to hear it. The crass crowd, the very decorous crowd,
Decorums. Yeah.
whatever the crowd is, what we need to learn is how to converge together when we need to
Mhm.
and work alongside each other. That's all. That's all we like. I don't need to convince if you're a post-libertarian, I don't need you to necessarily buy into my idea. I just need to be able to be on sufficient terms with you so that if I run into somebody that I realize is not my crowd, I can direct them to you.
Yes.
Right. That's all I need. And that happens. And if, as long as we're united in that front, we're united to be able to say, um, I understand where everybody fits and I'm working on developing the relationship with the individual that's right before me, and we can direct them. Right.
Right.
And I'm sorry. I think I'm diverging a little
No,
bit.
I think this is perfect. I think that is something that the Liberty Unity movement that kind of took hold with me and Reed and David
Mhm.
earlier this year, and a lot of people jumped on, and obviously you're a big advocate for, is that look, we don't, if you come across somebody who's interested in liberty, but maybe you're not that puzzle piece that fits them,
Right.
you should have faith and confidence in others in this movement who see the world maybe a little bit differently than you,
Right.
and be able to say, you know what, I think you'll like this guy.
Right.
And but not enough people do that. They go, well, I don't want to strengthen that fact. And so that man, just you nailed it. So okay, well, let's get into final thoughts.
Okay.
And we're gonna change it up a little bit for tonight's
All right.
final
Let's see what
thoughts.
happens.
Let's talk about
You got
dad
all the
life.
cool segues, man. What's up with that?
Hey,
I gotta step up the
look,
game here on mine.
I can do it, part-time hustler here. So let's talk about being a dad.
All right.
One of the things that my son just turned 7 months old. Yours is 2.5. Is that right?
Almost 3 in February.
Almost 3, right? So you're a good bit ahead of me. One of the things that I do worry about, I see the state of the world, and I go, man, how am I going to lead a young man to be able to conquer this world? And there's a term that I keep coming up with that I think is going to be extremely important, and that is to be an empathetic alpha.
Okay.
Because I see you and I go, that's alpha, right? You're a leader. You're an unquestioned leader. You garner respect wherever you go, but you do it by caring about other people. What is it that when I say the words empathetic alpha, what is it the things that come to mind for you, and how is that potentially something that you are basically training your son to be?
I think you may be the first person that's ever described me as empathetic. Um,
Maybe I think observationalist, honestly, is a
right.
different word for empathetic, because empathy is simply trying to understand another person's perspective.
Yeah. I'm not always good at it, but I try.
Okay.
And one of the things that I've found through a lot of tough experiences, one of them was a prior failed marriage,
Yep.
is that listening is insanely important. And I'll give you a great example from a marriage perspective that I haven't experienced yet because my son is still learning to talk. So the communication is still very, very limited. But I remember, and virtually every man, every person that's married or has a significant other has probably experienced this or knows somebody that has. But my ex-wife would sometimes say something like, you never do this. Maybe like you don't take me on a date anymore. And I would be like, well, I did that last week. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what are you talking about? Never. We just did this like a week ago. How you talk about we never? Right. And what I wasn't doing was hearing what she was really trying to say. Because a lot of times what people say and what they mean are not congruent. Because people they speak casually. They speak off the cuff. And they're not always thinking like, I am a speaker at an event and I got to get all my words correctly. They're like, I'm just talking to you. Right. And so sometimes the emotion will come out. And so what I learned was, not just, this rigid, like, okay, they're speaking in absolutes. Clearly that can't be, logic. It's just more like, okay, here's what they said. The words at face value that came out. Now I need to go dig in and find out, is that what they really meant? Because if your significant other says you don't take me out on a date anymore, unless you're never unless it's been like 2 years since you've taken them out on a date, right? The likelihood is what they mean is you don't take me out enough to the point that it feels like you never do it. Yeah. Right? It's much different than the words that actually came out of their mouth. And so for my son, I try to remember that, like, and it's a lot easier in some ways and a lot harder in other ways because he cannot communicate. So I have to try to figure out, like, what is he trying to communicate, which is total guesswork at some point. And then it starts becoming a little bit more clear once he has language skills and he can start, saying things, right? But even then it's still difficult because he might say something like hurt, and you're like, okay, what hurts
What hurt? Yeah.
exactly, you know? And then he might, point in a very general direction like hurt, and you're like like your nose, your face, your eye, like I don't know what you're pointing at. Or he may not even point at all. He may just kind of, use some kind of motion or whatever. Right. And so, so it's a good reminder that, hey, I need to dig deeper, and I need to have the patience to dig a little bit deeper to figure out what it is that he's trying to communicate. Because what we say and what we're trying to communicate are not always the same thing. And so
100%.
one of the things that I want to teach him is to be patient with people and to really think about it. And my wife was, she was very good at this at the very beginning of our relationship. And I don't want to say that she's not good at it now, but what happens is after a while, you kind of get into this groove and you kind of start to feel like you know the person. And so
Mhm.
you don't do the same things that you might have done
Right.
initially. But I remember when we were first dating, she would say things like, I see that you're very passionate right now, which was more like, why are you being angry? Why are you being an angry cuss right now? What is going on? What's up?
Right.
Tell me
Right.
about this.
Right.
Right. But she was like, I see that you're being very passionate about this. Tell me a little bit more. And she would ask more questions. Right. And
Mhm.
she would patiently listen and then ask more questions. And then eventually we would get to what it is that I was trying to say, which was often not what I was saying initially. And so I think that one of the things that I want to raise him to be is somebody that listens to people and hears what they're having, what they say, and then question it and say, okay, is what they just said exactly what they mean? And it's usually not. And a series of questions can help you identify whether it is or whether you've basically guessed, right? And so I think that maybe you're empathetic
Yeah.
as far as the alpha. Um, it comes with a negative connotation. I just want
It
him to
does.
be confident in who he is. And if
Yeah.
that makes him an alpha, then so be it. But I want him to be confident. And I remember reading a book a long time ago. I don't remember what book it was, but it was one of those like psychological, like I think it was like a book written by a psychologist about men.
Mhm.
And I believe it was from a
Right.
religious perspective. And there was a story in there about taking their child to the doctor, and they suggested, or maybe the story was about, I don't remember exactly, but the child would sit there and the doctor would say, okay, tell me about whatever it is that's, that that you're not feeling good about, right? And then at the end, the parent would say, okay, Johnny, is there anything else that you need to tell the doctor? Right? And what they were doing was training the child to say, to believe that whatever they said was important.
Yeah.
Right. And so, therefore, hey, just because he's a doctor doesn't mean that what you have to say is not important. So, before you leave, make sure if what you believe is important gets said. And I think that I would want to teach him that in a communication with somebody else, if he's got something to say, that he's not afraid to say it. That doesn't mean that he just blurts it
Right.
out and be like, you're a jackass. Right. Like I don't want him
Yeah.
to do that, because that's
Right.
not very, very productive. But if you want
That's not
it, but if
courage
he's like,
either.
right. But if he wants to say, like, hey, I don't feel like you're hearing me, he should say that.
Yeah.
And he should be confident in saying that. Right. If I had a daughter, same thing. I would want her to feel confident in saying what she felt, maybe even more so. I think
Mhm.
boys tend to be a little bit more willing to speak what's on their mind, until they're basically shushed into not doing so. And I think girls,
Right.
I think unfortunately right now in the way that our society works, you kind of got to go a little bit out of your way to teach them, hey, speak up and speak your piece. And maybe even in some cases, physically assert your piece if you have to.
Right.
Little boys are much more willing to get in a fight than girls will, as a rule of thumb. Um, and so, to me, the alpha portion of this is basically more like assertive. Like, I want you to be empathetic and assertive. And
Yeah.
if that ends up making people believe that you're an alpha, well, so be it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But
It's
as
okay to
long
have
as you
followers.
spoke up and you walked away from whatever situation that you were in, feeling like your voice was heard, and whatever it is that you needed to address got addressed. That's what I want.
And then the empathetic part, you listened and we're
Correct.
concerned about the
Right.
work of others.
Right. You didn't just blow it off and be like, "You son of a bitch, you're a moron," blah blah
Right.
blah, like that. Like that. Yeah, yeah. You got heard, but not in a very meaningful sense. I want, because at the end of the day, I can talk to you however I want. But if my idea of whatever it is I'm trying to communicate to you is important enough, then I should reel it in to the point where it gets delivered in a manner where it has an impact on you. I mean, if it's that
Absolutely.
important, then I should worry about my delivery,
Yes.
right?
Delivery.
And part of delivery is listening and knowing your audience. And I'll tell you right now, on Twitter, I do this. People don't realize it, but I do it. If I know somebody's a little bit more rough and tough, I
Mhm.
might I might not put on the gloves so quickly. And
Right.
other people I know, they're a little bit more sensitive, and I generally withhold a little bit. And I just try to interact with people based on how I understand they will receive it.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you're too soft to somebody that's rough and tough, then
Mhm.
it may not get through, just in the same way that if you're too harsh on somebody that's a little more sensitive, it won't get through. But
Absolutely.
ultimately, my goal, if I'm going to bother interacting with you, I want you to hear and understand and receive whatever it is that I'm trying to tell you. And I will do whatever I have to do to make sure that happens, because ultimately my goal is not to deliver it in a particular way. It's to get it received. That's what I want.
Yes. The audience is the message. The
Mhm.
reception is the goal,
Right.
right? So
Right.
it's
And
not
that's how
about you
and it comes across as empathy. And I tend to look at it just like it's productive.
Yeah.
To me, everything needs to be productive.
Yes, absolutely. Guy, I think that is a phenomenal place to end. What do you want to plug? Where can the good folks follow you? See your podcast, all of that stuff.
So you've had it up on screen. So hopefully people have been taking
Oh,
a peek.
yeah.
Liberty Dad Pod on YouTube. I'm sorry, on Twitter. And then on YouTube, you can type in youtube.libertydad.com and it'll take you to my YouTube page. I am excited, and I will even kind of announce it because I haven't done it just yet. One of the candidates that's running for city council, his name is Pastor Tubb. He and I were talking, and we came to this idea that he should be a co-host on my podcast. So he is now going to be a co-host, but not remotely, in person, which I think makes
Nice.
a world of difference for me. And so we actually just recorded this last Tuesday, our first podcast episode. And the podcast that I'm doing for season 3, we are walking through this book. Well, not through the
Oh,
book. We're walking through
yes.
chapter 3 of this book, Introduction to the Libertarian Party. And in chapter 3, it's 25 libertarians on 25 issues. And there's only like maybe a paragraph on each issue. And I said, you know what? That would make for a great series. And so we are going to basically talk about all these different things and why libertarians believe these ideas, and then how we believe that a libertarian, maybe not utopia, but a libertarian driven world would approach, and how these things would benefit people. So we just did the first one. We did it on healthcare, and we're going to continue down the line. And I think I'm really excited to put this out. This will come out Monday night, 10 p.m. It'll come out on my YouTube channel. It'll come out on Facebook, and I'll post it, on all the different social media. So, just follow me. If you follow me on Twitter, that's where I am that's where I am the most.
Yep.
You will definitely be kept abreast of everything that I'm doing, because that's where I'm the most active. I'm not so active on Facebook. And then YouTube, of course, is just where I post all the videos. So go to youtube.libertydad.com, hit the subscribe button, make sure you do whatever it is that makes it pop up for you and says, hey, Liberty Dad has just posted something new. And
Notifications.
and then you'll have it, or just follow me on Twitter, and keep an eye out, and I will be posting all these things. So that's what I've got going on. We've got a lot of things going on in the party right now. We've got 3 candidates. So look up Libertarian Party of Duval County. You can find us on Meetup and Facebook. We're very active on Facebook.
Well, there it is, folks. Thanks, DL, so much for coming on. What a phenomenal conversation.
It was a
I know
pleasure.
I have loved it. Make sure you go follow DL at Liberty Dad Pod and YouTube.libertydadpod.com. Monday nights, we start season 3. Thank you
Yep.
guys for tuning in to Sell Liberty. Thanks, DL. You guys have a great evening.